on to Steve. Now, Steve first came in contact with us, and we've been working together with Steve since about 2014. And Steve, like John, came across the concept, became a licensed user, became a trainer, and has developed a lot of expertise in its application in sales processes and in sales training. He's now one of our distributors in Australia, and his background includes, usefully, psychology. I guess there's a lot of psychology to be used in sales activity, but he's got almost 2 decades experience of working in sales, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry. He now specializes in sales training activity, and what I'm going to do now is pass you over to Steve.
Thanks very much, Doug, and very nice to hear from both you and John to set the scene. What I'm going to do is just spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about how we can develop and sustain sales success, given what we're going through at the moment, a 1 in 100-year global pandemic, chaos, crisis, challenges going on for all of us, sales representatives being stood down, employees losing jobs, all that sort of stuff. And things are slowly opening up here in Australia, and I think the same is happening in the UK. And I thought, okay, what sort of image can we put up there so they keep calm and carry on? Given we're doing a UK-Australia link here today, we thought that was a nice representation of what we all should be doing. So self-awareness, I thought Macaulay Culkin, Home Alone, I can't remember what year this was, probably a good 20 or 30 years ago when he was still a little fella. But self-awareness and being aware of what are the core drivers. So if I go back to that pizza image and you start to have a feeling around, I don't feel in control of my emotions right now. I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling anxious, and that's playing out in a certain way. If you're aware of that, how's that going to assist you? If it's not going to assist you positively, what can you do? If you're feeling like you're not confident in your abilities right now as a salesperson or as a sales manager, or you're behind budget, how are you going to regain that confidence in abilities so that you can, sell the necessary features and benefits and make sure that you exceed the needs of your clients. So self-awareness. And really one of the things that we talk about with this is when you look at yourself, in the mirror and you look at that pizza diagram, why am I responding the way I am? And if I can understand that, then I can understand that it's normal. I can start to think about solutions to help myself be more in control or be more committed, or rise to the challenge that this pandemic is throwing me at the moment. And then also be motivated to do something. John spoke about away versus towards motivation, and intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation and all those sorts of things. These are what we need to be looking at. And so what are some of the things you can do when you become self-aware? And, I think back to myself as a salesperson. I started in 92 with a company that was then called Astra. It's AstraZeneca these days, but, being able to seek feedback and not being afraid to seek feedback around your abilities or around your emotions, or am I setting my goals too high or too low? Seek that feedback. And that kind of reminded me of, for those of you that can remember the Johari window, and you create that 2x2 matrix, and what do I know and what do others know? Well, that's great. That's open. That's in the open quadrant. But what do I not know that my sales manager knows or that my peers know? Then, they need to give me some feedback, or I need to be courageous and seek that feedback so that I can improve in that area. So that's one thing we can be doing. Two, what can we be doing, or what have a lot of us been doing across these last 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks is pausing and reflecting. Pause, reflect. what's going on for me right now. If I'm a sales representative, a business development person, a business unit director, in Doug's role where you've got people approaching you, what are the skills that I've got, and what do I need to sharpen and work on? And so pause and reflect, and that helps you to become even more self-aware. Then as you're doing that, you kind of go, okay, well, there's a lot of things that I'm doing well, and maybe there's some things that I'm holding on to that are not adding any value. So I then need to say, well, what needs to change and what needs to improve? And then, maybe you can complete an assessment, or maybe you've already done an assessment. So, those of you that are on this webinar, if you think back to the first assessment you ever did, and I can think back to having done SPQ, I think it was the Sales Preference Questionnaire, and SPQ Gold back in the early 1990s. And that had things like call reluctance, and it had extroversion, and it had openness to learning, and those sorts of things. John, can you think back to what your first assessment is that you did, either in your engineering days or in sales?
First one that I did, as I recall, was a personality profile, which was the DISC analysis.
Yep.
Dominant, intuitive, I can't even recall it now. But what I do remember from that was that my boss at the time put so much stall on the results of that outcome, or of that particular assessment. And he was really good, because he knew precisely how to get the best out of his team by using that assessment. And I thought that was one of those great assessments where you're looking at people's actions.
Yeah. And Doug, can you remember the first psychometric assessment that you did? Which one was
Yes,
it?
I can remember. It was one that you don't hear much of these days. It was the 16PF, which was one of the pioneering questionnaires, and it's based on the Big Five personality model. I highly respected. I can remember that, and I found it quite insightful.
And we all can think of whether it's 16PF, or there's Hogan, there's Facet 5, there's Saville. Each of you have got your own assessments that you use. MTQ and the MTQ suite obviously will look at the 4 C's, and then if you use the MTQ Plus, that will dive down into the detail and kind of give you an idea around which of these 4 C's am I thriving in at the moment, and which of these 4 C's perhaps needs a little bit of work. So what do we see here? So let's assume this is a salesperson on your team. And just to quickly explain, for those of you that know psychometrics, this is a standard 10 scale, or a STEN scale, where 1 to 3 down this end of the scale is kind of representing what we might call mentally sensitive. The 8 to 10 end is where we would be saying that's a mentally tough individual, and 4 to 7 is kind of the average. That's where we would expect 68% of the norming group to kind of sit. So if this was a salesperson on your team, if you're a sales manager, one of the first things you kind of look at here is the emotional control is a 3. So this individual might need to look at keeping their emotions in check, not getting as emotional, not handling objections well, handling rejection well. And I think back to when I started all those years ago, you had to handle a lot of rejection. You had to keep knocking on the door and take a no and take another no until you got your first yes. And I remember Tom Hopkins was the person whose sales training we used at the time, How to Master the Art of Selling. And he was the first real estate agent, I think, to make $1 million in commission as a real estate agent. That was all about being able to have 20 face-to-face opportunities before you got one success. And you think about that, Doug, you think about the example you gave. Imagine having to go through 19 rejections before you got one you know, positive result where someone actually wanted to see you. I think things have changed now since then, but if this individual is low on emotional control, you'd be trying to coach them and say, okay, what is it about your emotions that you know, is causing you to, I guess, lose it right now? And how can you maintain a sense of calm, you know, and zen, and work through that so that you can deal with that. The other thing we're kind of seeing with this individual is that their interpersonal confidence, you know, so to pick up on what Doug was talking about, you know, they're perhaps asking lots of questions and being in tune, but perhaps they've lost some confidence in their abilities. You know, they've missed budget for quarter number one, or quarter number two is not looking good, and you start to doubt and have confidence in your abilities. So you might then start to coach this individual to build some confidence back up in their abilities. And the other link I'm seeing in this one is the lower risk orientation compared to the learning orientation. So not as willing to take risks, and perhaps linked to the emotional side of things. So that's how we would be using the assessment to help this person become self-aware and work on these things. Then we look at another individual, and we're seeing slightly a bit of a flip this time in terms of confidence in abilities being high and extreme. Now, the danger around this is perhaps overconfidence in abilities, and that then can become seen as arrogance. You know, you want to have confidence and belief in yourself, but you don't want to have that overconfidence. And then for this person, we might be saying, okay, you need to be asking more questions. So we wouldn't want them to do what the salesperson did to Doug and spend 20 minutes giving a spiel without being able to ask a question. Yeah. And so a lot of you would have heard 2 ears, 1 mouth. So talk, you know, once, listen twice as much as what you talk. So, you know, 2/3 of the sales call should be spent listening rather than talking. And I learned that, you know, in 1992, and that's stuck with me, always trying to make sure that you listen more than what you talk. The next thing is, and we're all across this, you know, if we're in sales, we've got goals, we've got targets, you know, activity equals results. That was one that you know, was always thrown at us. You know, make sure you get out there, but it's not just about doing 20 activities a day. We want quality activities, and those quality activities will lead to results. Those results hopefully lead to a nice upward ski slope here. So we're seeing some growth in sales. That's always a good thing. Market share. You know, are we increasing our market share? Are we decreasing our market share? And then share of voice. You know, do we have a share of voice out there, and are our competitors being heard more than we are? And they're the sorts of goals that we were measured on, you know, back when I was a sales representative, and then also in my days as a sales manager. So with goal setting, we're looking to give meaning and direction, and then fuel and energy, you know, to people to achieve their objectives and to approach new challenges. So that's kind of the underlying principle around goal setting. If you've got a person who is low on goal orientation or low on achievement orientation, you know, then goal setting might be an area that you would work on with them. So you'd look at the individual and say, okay, let's look at your goals. Let's look at setting smart goals, you know, and then you'd work out a calendar. So you've got 365 days a year. Let's take away 100 and X number of days for weekends. Let's take away your public holidays. That leaves you 220 selling days per year. You need to see your clients X number of times. You know, let's start to set those smart goals. And I'm not sure whether it still exists. Those of you in the pharmaceutical industry, we used to talk about 5-circuit planning, and that was all about getting around your key clients 5 times to 6 times per year, so that your sales message was constantly being heard, and that if you were trying to launch a new product or get your product prescribed, that the frequency of message was being heard. So that was all about setting smart goals. Breaking that down into you know, the A from SMART is achievable or attainable. So setting achievable chunks, bite-sized chunks from a goal setting perspective, is important. And so we're in times of crisis and chaos like now. Okay, what you can't get out perhaps yet and see your clients face to face, but can you access Zoom or WebEx or Teams or make a phone call or whatever it might be, and then make sure that those chunks of what you're trying to achieve, are realistic and have that time frame as well, and putting those milestones in place. Okay, you need to do this within quarter number 2. So April, May, June, quarter 2, or quarter 4 if we're working on the July to June financial year. What are the milestones? And then give yourself a reward, give yourself a pat on the back around that. So I might just pause there. Doug or John, is there anything you would add from a goal setting perspective with the participants?
Somebody that I've been dealing with fairly recently has looked at SMART goals, and they've said, why set achievable goals? Why not set a big fat hairy goal and then work out what you've got to do to get it? Yeah. Which is another way of looking at it. That was their words, not mine. Big
hairy audacious goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doug, would you add anything?
No. You're the experts here.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay. Now, you mentioned this a bit earlier, and you probably didn't even know that I had this slide in here, but whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Okay. So Henry Ford, and I don't know what year he said this, but every time I think about this, and I think, my attitude is, I'm not good at this, or I can't do this, or I always have difficulty with this client, or this client doesn't like this, or whatever it might be. It's about starting to flip that around. Okay, so if I think I can, or if I think this is achievable, then there is a sense that I will be able to achieve. So the idea around this one, if we look at someone that perhaps has lower confidence in abilities or lower emotional control, similar to what we looked at before, we want that individual to kind of say, okay, well, we are what we think. Okay, so if we think positively, if we attempt to banish our negative thoughts, and if we then attempt to reframe and turn our negative thoughts into positives, and one of my colleagues used to say, turning ants into pants, so automatic negative thoughts into positive, affirming new thoughts, so ants into pants, then that kind of flips it around pretty quickly. So we are what we think. So things like affirmations, I think this became popular probably in the 80s and 90s, where people were, saying positive things to themselves. So if I'm sitting in the car about to enter a client's office or workplace, and I say to myself, I know my stuff, I've done my research, I've got all my sales resources and sales materials, then I'm going to go okay here. So whatever that positive affirmation is, that makes me look at that glass as a glass half full. And John, I might get you to share your anecdote about engineers and how they see glasses as, is it half full or half empty, or how do engineers see?
Some see the glasses half full, others see the glasses half empty. An engineer just sees the glasses twice as big as it needs to be.
I really like that. So,
can I just also interject with something else?
Absolutely, yes.
Steve? And it's that in terms of thinking, within any performance environment, there are only 4 elements. There's the physical attributes, the knowledge, the skills, and the mindset. So in sales, in my experience, I've never ever lost a sale because somebody could run faster or jump higher or could lift heavier weights. So physical attributes are really not relevant in sales. So it then leaves knowledge and skills and attitude. Knowledge and skills don't get developed unless attitude, the thinking is right. So everything, as far as I'm concerned, which is why the mental toughness thing appealed to me so much, everything, absolutely everything about our performance as salespeople comes down to the thinking element of it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So I've got think 3 positives. So if I'm sitting in the car and I'm getting ready to go in and, it's challenging, I'm behind budget, we've been in lockdown. You know, I've been stood down for the last 3 months while they're trying to work out what JobKeeper package they're going to offer me or what they're going to offer me as a salesperson. And I say, I know my products. I'm ready to handle any objections. You know, I've got a great relationship with this customer. You know, I'm pumping up my tires and getting myself ready to go. You know, turning negatives into positives, we've kind of spoken about. Self-talk, you know, thought stopping, you know, so just being able to say, okay, just stop that thought and turn it around into something positive, and start to look at your role models. Who are the people that you have sold with, you know, sold against, reported to, and so on, and what have they done, and how have they remained positive, and how have they thrived during times of crisis and chaos and so on. Another little trick that, you know, I guess we want to talk about, or tip, is visualization. So, you know, I want to be the pussycat looking in the mirror and seeing a lion, you know, and that's, you know, so we can imagine success or we can imagine failure, and we can learn from that. So if you are, you know, and I've played soccer competitively, you know, so taking the penalty and target practice and penalty shootout from a visualization perspective is being able to close my eyes and visualize that I'm about to take this penalty. I'm left-footed. I'm going to the keeper's top right corner, and you know, he's not going to save this. So if I replay that enough times in my head, it's already done, so that when it comes time to take that penalty, you know, I'm confident that I can do that. You know, so that second point about you've already done it in your head puts you into that position, you know, and using things like guided imagery, you know, where there might be apps, or working with individuals that can help you visualize and focus and get yourself in the right headspace, puts you in a good position. If we've got someone here, let's just pause and look at this individual for a second. Remember, I said 1 to 3 is someone that's mentally sensitive. If this individual was on your sales team, or if you are this individual, we're possibly seeing some anxiety playing out, and possibly some stuff going on. Okay, so if, again, I've spoken, and a lot of my peers and colleagues, you know, are on pause at the moment. Their workshops are postponed. You know, they're not able to get out and see clients and sell. So, you know, they don't feel like their life's in control. They're not in control of their emotions. They've lost all confidence in their abilities. So I'm then starting to fear and worry. Okay, what next? Am I going to have a job? And that fear and worry is going to turn into physiological consequences, and it's up to me to start, you know, managing and controlling that. So if I smile and laugh, you know, and if I do that to you guys, I smile and laugh, you know, that endorphin release, or being able to smile, it's hard to maintain a sense of stress and fear and worry if I'm smiling and laughing, you know. So that's not, sometimes it's easier said than done, but being able to just smile and laugh and say, okay, she'll be right, to use the Aussie vernacular and terminology, and smile and laugh it through, you know, then we can maybe look at controlled breathing. Okay, 5 in, and then 5 out, and 5 in and 5 out, and do that 3 times, and, you know, find you're able to control, you know, your anxiety and your heart rate and all those sorts of things that happen when you're anxious. Doing things like ear tapping, you know, and then I guess finding your meridian points, and then linking it back to positive thinking. If I say positive things to myself, then I can control my anxiety. And this one is easier said than done at times as well, but if I find that I can get a good night's sleep, you know, and then maybe do something like a yoga nidra, or some mindfulness, or some breathing beforehand, that's going to, I guess, overcome some of my anxiety. And another one I just wanted to quickly talk about before we go to questions and answers: attentional control. So sometimes we find we might have we might be the salesperson, or we might have a salesperson in our team whose attentional control isn't quite there, you know, so the focus, sustained attention and concentration isn't quite there, but it needs to be there. You know, so interruptions and distractions then undermine their capability, you know, to be able to perform and achieve. So we want to be able to, I guess, blinker them, you know, get them to be mindful, get them to be focused on the task at hand, the call that you're about to make, the discussion you're about to have, and be mindful of that. You know, concentration, the stork stand. I might get Doug to explain the stork stand, but that's the old yoga pose, isn't it, Doug?
It is, and it's a way of emptying the mind so that you get rid of all the worries in your head. If you can stand,
I could try and stand
on
and
one
do
leg,
that, but it wouldn't be a good look now. Yeah, thanks, Amanda.
Yeah. So if you can stand on one leg for 30 seconds, you're doing well.
Fantastic. So that's attentional control, and, you know, shutting out distractions, you know, so being able to, you know, I talked about putting the blinkers on, but, you know, there's the periphery and there's the other stuff going on and the white noise, being able to shut out those distractions and then moving on from there. And sometimes having controlled distraction. So sometimes you might be so focused, you know, that you might need that controlled distraction, you know, to just, I guess, break away from being so intense and focused.